The knock came just as the last light bled across the Montana sky, and Abigail Thornfield froze with her hand on the cabin door latch. No one came to a widow's ranch after sundown with good news. The autumn wind tore across the open land and struck the porch hard enough to rattle the loose boards under her boots. It carried the smell of dry grass, cold earth, and coming frost. Out beyond the cabin, the ranch stretched into shadow, broken only by the dark line of the barn, the fences, and the low rolling backs of cattle in the far pasture. The mountains in the distance looked like black teeth cutting into a sky the color of old metal. Abigail did not move at first. Her heart beat once, hard, then again. 6 months had passed since they had buried Samuel behind the barn. 6 months since the preacher's voice had faded into the wind, and the men had lowered her husband into the frozen ground with ropes and bowed heads. 6 months of doing work meant for two people. 6 months of mending fences, hauling feed, counting cattle, and falling asleep with boots still on because there was always more to do the next day. She reached for the Winchester leaning against the wall beside the door. The knock came again. Not pounding, not desperate, just steady, careful. A man who knew he stood on someone else's land and meant no insult by arriving unasked. Abigail opened the door a crack first, then wider, the rifle still close in her hand. A man stood on the porch, tall and broad in a weathered duster, hat in both hands. The wind tugged at his dark hair and at the edges of his coat. His face was lean, sun-worn, tired in the way only a long road could make a man. There was nothing wild about him, nothing drunken or mean, but there was hardness there. Not cruelty, survival. Then Abigail saw the child behind him. A little girl stood half hidden at his side, wrapped in a thin shawl that was no match for the cold. She could not have been older than 7 or 8. Her dark hair was tangled from travel, and she held a rag doll to her chest with both hands as if it were the one thing in the world no one would take from her. Her eyes were too large for her thin face. The man spoke first. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for calling this late. Name S. Nathaniel Blackwood. I was told in town you might be needing a rancher." The words hit Abigail oddly, not because of what he said, but because of how plain he said it. No begging, no smooth talk, just the truth laid down simple. She kept her face still. "Who told you that?" "General store owner. Gray beard talks too much." Despite herself, one corner of her mouth almost moved. That would be Henry. Nathaniel gave a small nod. He said the widow Thornfield was trying to keep a full ranch alive by herself. Said she was proud enough not to ask for help, but practical enough not to slam the door if it arrived. Abigail looked from him to the child and back again. The man's boots were worn at the soles. His coat had been mended more than once, but it was clean. The child's dress had been let down twice at the hem. Their horse was tired, so were they, and you just happened to be passing through. He glanced back at the girl before answering. "Truth is, ma'am, my daughter and I have been on the road near 3 weeks. I'm looking for winter work. I know cattle. I can mend fence, shoe a horse, repair a roof, and keep my mouth shut when work needs doing. I don't drink, I don't gamble, and I'll earn every dollar." The little girl tugged on his coat. "Papa," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "I'm cold." That did it, not all at once, not like a lightning strike, more like something long frozen inside. Abigail shifted and cracked. She thought of the empty cabin behind her, of the stew on the stove meant for one, of the silence that sat with her every night like another living thing, of the second plate she still sometimes reached for before remembering there was no one to fill it. "What's your daughter's name?" she asked. Nathaniel's face softened when he looked down at the child. "Evangeline, but most folks call her Evie." The girl gave a small shy nod. Abigail opened the door wider. "Put your horse in the barn. There's hay in the loft and water in the trough. Then come inside. I've got stew enough for more than one person." The relief that crossed Nathaniel's face was quick and controlled, but it was there. "We're obliged, ma'am, truly." Abigail stepped back to let them pass, then watched as he led the horse toward the barn with the girl beside him, her small hand wrapped firmly around his. They did not walk like beggars. They walked like people who had learned that pride had to bend sometimes if it meant keeping a child warm. Inside, the cabin felt different the moment she shut the door. She moved to the stove and stirred the stew, though it did not need stirring. Then she took out 3 bowls instead of 1, 3 spoons, 3 tin cups. The motions felt strange at first, then strangely right. When the knock came again, softer this time, Abigail opened the door to find them both washed as best they could be with pump water and fading light. Evangeline's hair had been braided in a hurry. Nathaniel had removed the dust from his face and hands. The little girl held her doll tighter when she stepped inside, her eyes going wide as she took in the cabin. "It's pretty," she whispered. Abigail looked around as if seeing it for the first time. The curtains her mother had sewn years ago. The shelf Samuel had built with his own hands. The quilts folded neatly at the foot of the bed. None of it was grand, but it was home. "Thank you," Abigail said. "Would you like to help me set the table?" Evangeline looked up at her father. At his nod, she moved carefully toward the cupboard, like a child afraid one wrong step might send this kindness vanishing. Abigail handed her a bowl. The girl carried it with both hands and set it down as if it were made of gold. At supper, the room warmed with more than fire. Nathaniel ate slowly with the manners of a man who had known hunger and did not take a hot meal lightly. Evangeline tried to do the same, though sleep tugged at her hard. Her head dipped once, twice, then lifted again. "How long have you been traveling?" Abigail asked. Nathaniel wiped his mouth with the back of his hand before answering. "Since late summer, picked up work where I could, harvest mostly, small repairs, enough to keep moving." "And her mother?" His hand stilled. "4 months gone," he said quietly. "Fever." Abigail lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "We had a small place in Wyoming. After she died, I couldn't stay there. Every board in that house remembered her." Abigail understood that too well. Some grief lived in the ground itself, in walls, in doorways, in chairs left empty too long. Evangeline's eyes had gone glassy now. She fought sleep bravely through half a biscuit, then lost the battle and slumped sideways against the table, cheek on folded arms, the rag doll trapped beneath her. Nathaniel started to rise. "I should take her outside and make camp in the barn. You've already done more than enough." Abigail looked at the sleeping child, so light and small and tired it made her chest ache. "There's a room off the kitchen," she said, "used to hold supplies. There's space enough for 2 bedrolls and a mattress that's still decent." Nathaniel stared at her. "You mean for us to stay?" "What?" "For 2 weeks," Abigail said firmly, because she was not a fool and because kindness on the frontier had to walk beside caution. "Trial only. $30 a month and board. You work hard, you stay. You don't, you move on." Something unreadable moved through his face. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper too. The look of a man who had heard a door open where he had expected another one to close. "You have my word," he said. Abigail believed him before she wanted to. That night she carried Evangeline to the small side room herself. The child woke only enough to throw her arms around Abigail's neck in half-sleep before settling again. It was a simple thing, thoughtless, trusting. But it hit Abigail like a blade wrapped in velvet. The room had once held sacks of flour and salt. Now it held a child breathing softly under one of Abigail's old quilts. When she stepped back into the main room, Nathaniel stood by the fire, hat in his hands again. "I'm grateful," he said, "more than I can say." "Save your gratitude," Abigail replied. "This ranch isn't easy work and winter's coming hard." He gave a slight nod. "I've known hard winters." Their eyes met then. 2 strangers both carrying grief like a second skin, both too tired to pretend otherwise. "How long for you?" he asked quietly. 6 months. He looked into the fire. "Doesn't get easy." "No," Abigail said. "I figured that much. But it gets less sharp." It was the truest thing anyone had said to her in months. The next morning Nathaniel was awake before dawn, but Abigail was already up. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the cabin. In the pale gray light she moved around the stove in a work dress, her hair pinned up tight, every motion clean and sure. Evangeline appeared moments later, still sleepy, and stopped at the sight of the table set again for 3. Real milk. She asked when Abigail poured some into a cup. Fresh this morning. The child looked at the cup as if it belonged in church. After breakfast, Nathaniel stepped outside with Abigail to see the ranch in full light. The place showed its strain plainly now. Fence posts leaned. One gate sagged on a broken hinge. The chicken coop needed work. The loft boards in the barn looked old enough to kill a careless man. The north corral had a weak corner that would not survive the first bad storm. Nathaniel took it all in with one sweep of his eyes. Corral first, he said, then the gate, after that the loft. Abigail studied him. You see problems fast. I've had to. He did not say more, and she did not ask. The first days fell into a rhythm that felt almost dangerous in how natural it was. Nathaniel worked from dawn to dark and proved every claim he had made. He fixed the weak fence corner before noon. By evening the gate swung true and clean. On the second day he repaired the coop door, reinforced the loft, and sharpened tools Samuel had once kept in better condition than Abigail had managed alone. He worked without boasting, without complaint, without needing to be told twice, and Evangeline changed with the same quiet speed. The child began by lingering in doorways, silent and watchful. Then she followed Abigail to the hen house, then to the garden patch, then to the pantry where Abigail showed her how to sort beans and fold flour sacks for reuse. By the fourth day she was talking, not much at once, small things, about the kittens in the barn, about how her mother used to braid her hair, about how she liked the blue curtains in the kitchen because they looked like summer sky. One evening, Abigail found herself teaching Evangeline to mend a torn apron by lamplight. Small stitches, Abigail said, close together, that's what keeps things strong. Evangeline copied her carefully, tongue pressed to her lip in concentration. Like this. Exactly like that. Across the room, Nathaniel looked up from oiling a bridle. The expression on his face was gone in a second, but Abigail saw it. Not surprise, not even gratitude, something more painful. A man seeing a piece of his child return to her. By the end of the week, the ranch no longer sounded like one lonely woman fighting the world. It sounded like boots crossing the porch, a child laughing at kittens, a man carrying in firewood, dishes at supper, voices in the evening. It sounded dangerously close to life. Which was why Abigail should have known trouble would come for it. On the 8th morning, frost silvered the yard, and the breath of cattle rose white in the cold. Abigail stepped onto the porch with coffee in hand just as 3 riders appeared at the far end of the lane. She recognized the man in front before he reached the fence. Pike Morrison, big shoulders, scarred mouth, pale eyes that never held warmth. He worked for Cyrus Hartwell, the richest ranch owner in the territory, and the man Samuel had distrusted more than any snake in the grass. Nathaniel came from the barn at Abigail's sharp call, a pitchfork still in his hand. Evangeline, who had been scattering feed for the chickens, looked up too. Inside, Evie, Nathaniel said, his voice changing in a way Abigail had not heard before. The child obeyed at once. Morrison dismounted slowly, smiling a smile that never touched his eyes. "Mrs. Thornfield," he drawled, "heard you hired yourself a rancher." Abigail set down her coffee. "State your business." Morrison's gaze slid to Nathaniel, then back to her. "Just neighborly concern. Hartwell's got a few questions about cattle crossing lines and fences getting neglected. Would hate for a widow running alone to find herself in trouble she can't manage." Nathaniel stepped forward 1 pace. Not enough to threaten, enough to answer. "She's not running alone." Morrison looked at him for a long moment, and something cold passed between the 2 men. Abigail could not name it yet, but she felt it. Then Morrison smiled again, thin as wire. "No," he said softly, "looks like she is." Pike Morrison stood at the fence with the kind of smile that made the morning feel colder. Abigail kept her shoulders straight, though her stomach had gone tight. She knew men like Morrison. Samuel had warned her often enough. Men who did not start with bullets. Men who started with pressure, with hints, with the quiet promise that life could be made harder if you refused to bend. Nathaniel rested the pitchfork against the porch rail, but he did not step back. He stood beside Abigail as if he had every right to be there, as if he had been doing so for years. Morrison noticed that too. Hartwell don't like confusion on his borders, he said, and there's been confusion. A few head with your brand were found near his south water yesterday. That's a lie, Abigail said at once. Our cattle were brought down from the upper pasture 2 days ago. I counted everyone myself. Morrison gave a lazy shrug. Then maybe you counted wrong. I did. His pale eyes shifted to Nathaniel. And maybe your new rancher don't know the land well enough yet. Nathaniel's voice stayed even. If cattle crossed, we'll ride the line and see how. Easy enough to settle with facts. For the first time, Morrison's smile thinned. Men like him did not care for facts when threats did the work faster. He leaned one arm over the fence rail. Mr. Hartwell's been patient with this place. Real patient. Your husband was hard-headed too. Didn't know when a good offer was a good offer. At the mention of Samuel, something flared in Abigail's chest. My husband knew exactly what Hartwell wanted. He wanted our stream and our lower grazing land. He wanted us gone. Morrison's eyes sharpened. Maybe he was right. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Then Evangeline's small face appeared in the cabin window. Morrison saw it. His expression changed almost too quickly to catch, but Abigail caught it all the same. He took in the child, the small shape behind the glass, and measured weakness. That your rancher's girl? He asked. Nathaniel went still. It was not the stillness of calm. It was the stillness of a man locking every part of himself down. Yes, he said. Morrison nodded once as if filing the fact away for later. Dangerous country for children. Nathaniel smiled then, but there was no warmth in it at all. Dangerous for men who don't know when to leave too. For one long moment Morrison did not move. Then he pushed off the fence. I'll tell Hartwell you plan to check your lines. Best do it quick. He doesn't enjoy being crossed. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. His 2 men followed. Before turning away, he looked once more at the house. Winter's coming, he said. Would be a shame if this place found itself without help. Then they rode off. Abigail did not realize she had stopped breathing until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Nathaniel waited until the riders were out of sight before turning toward the house. Evie, he called gently, stay inside for a moment, sunshine. The child disappeared from the window. Abigail folded her arms tight across herself. He was threatening us. Yes. You say that like the sky is blue. Nathaniel looked out across the far pasture. Men like him always start with a warning. They want fear to do the work for them. Abigail studied him. You know men like him well. He was quiet long enough that she wondered if he would answer at all. Finally he said, better than I'd like. They saddled horses within minutes. Abigail did not argue when Nathaniel said Evangeline would stay at the house with strict instructions not to leave the porch. The child did not like it, but one look at her father's face told her this was no ordinary ride. I'll be right back, he promised, crouching to her height. You stay with the cat and keep watch over the biscuits. Evangeline tried to be brave. I can do that. Abigail touched the girl's cheek before mounting. We won't be long. They rode the southern fence line first. The land dropped gradually there, opening into lower grass and the stream that had always been the true value of the Thornfield Ranch. Even in dry months, the water held. Samuel had known what that meant. Hartwell had known it too. They found the break a quarter-mile from the boundary marker. Not a natural break, not storm damage. The wire had been cut clean. Abigail stared down at it. That wasn't done by cattle. No. Nathaniel dismounted and crouched near the fence line. His eyes moved over the dirt, the grass, the tracks. Abigail had seen ranchers read land before, but this was different. He studied sign the way some men read letters in a book. What do you see? 3 riders. He pointed. Came in from Hartwell's side, drove a handful of cattle through here, then circled back. Enough to leave tracks, enough to make it look like your stock wandered. Abigail swallowed her anger. So Morrison comes with a complaint already made true. Nathaniel rose slowly. Not true, manufactured. She looked at him sharply. You talk like a lawman. He did not answer that. Instead, he began repairing the fence with the wire and tools they had brought. Abigail helped in silence for a while, the two of them working shoulder to shoulder against the cold morning wind. At last she said, Samuel used to say Hartwell was patient, said he'd pull one board at a time until the whole wall fell. Nathaniel twisted the wire tight and stood. Then we stop him at the first board. They rode the rest of the boundary after that. More small signs, nothing loud. Nothing that would stand up in town as proof, but enough to tell them what kind of game was beginning. By the time they returned, the light had shifted and the wind had sharpened. Evangeline was waiting on the porch with the barn cat in her lap and a blanket around her shoulders. Did the biscuits survive? Nathaniel asked as he swung down. She nodded solemnly. I protected them. Good, then the ranch is still standing. She smiled at that, and some of the tightness in Abigail's chest eased. At supper, none of them spoke much at first. The stew simmered. Firelight moved across the walls. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin like a living thing trying to get in. Evangeline finally broke the silence. Are those bad men coming back? Nathaniel looked at Abigail once before answering. Maybe. The child lowered her spoon. Did I do something wrong? Abigail's heart clenched. No, sweet pea, not one thing. Then why did he look at me like that? Nathaniel set his cup down carefully. Because some men think children make good ways to frighten grown folks. Evangeline went very still. Will he hurt us? Nathaniel leaned forward. Listen to me, sunshine. No one is going to touch you while I'm breathing. There was something in his voice that made even Abigail look at him differently. Later, after Evangeline had fallen asleep with her doll under one arm, Abigail found Nathaniel sitting alone on the porch steps, a rifle laid across his knees. The moon had not risen yet. The yard beyond him was all shadow and silver frost. You planning to sit guard all night? If I need to. Abigail stepped out and closed the door softly behind her. You can't sit guard every night until spring. No. Then tell me what you're not saying. He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Then he looked out over the dark ranch and said, I used to wear a badge. The words settled between them. Lawman. Deputy Marshal, Kansas first, then farther west. Abigail sat beside him slowly. I knew it. He gave a humorless half smile. How? You look at trouble like it already has a shape. He stared down at the rifle. I was good at it, reading men, knowing what kind of violence was coming before it arrived, sometimes stopping it. Sometimes. His jaw tightened, not always. The wind moved around the porch, bringing the smell of frost and distant pine. What happened? Abigail asked gently. Nathaniel let out a slow breath. I made enemies, the kind that wait, the kind that don't come at you straight because they know you're ready. They go around, through the back door, through the people you love. Abigail did not move. Martha was home alone with Evangeline, he continued. Evie was only a baby. I was out riding circuit. One of the men I'd put away came looking for me. He found them instead. A sick feeling moved through Abigail. No. Nathaniel nodded once, his face carved from shadow. Martha got between him and the crib, took the bullet meant for me. By the time I got back, he was still there. He stared into the yard as if he still saw that day written there. I killed him. Then I buried my wife and turned in the badge. Abigail's eyes burned. I told myself I was leaving that life behind, he said. But trouble like Morrison, Hartwell, men who use fear the way other men use rope, I know them too well. Abigail reached for his hand before she could think better of it. His fingers were cold and hard from the night air. You didn't fail them, she said. He gave a small, bitter shake of his head. Didn't I? No, The man who came to your house failed at being human. That's not your sin to carry." He looked at their joined hands, then at her face. For a moment, the cold night, the threats, the ranch, all of it seemed to fall away. There were only two people on a dark porch, both carrying grief big enough to bend a life around. Then the cabin door creaked open behind them. Evangeline stood there barefoot, rubbing one eye, her doll tucked under her arm. "Papa." Nathaniel stood at once. "What are you doing up, sunshine?" "I had a bad dream." He scooped her into his arms. She tucked herself against his shoulder and looked sleepily at Abigail. "Can Mrs. Abigail sit with us till I go back to sleep?" Abigail should have said no, should have stayed where things were still proper and clear and safe. Instead she stood. Yes. The child was back asleep before they reached the side room, but when Nathaniel laid her down, she caught Abigail's sleeve without waking and held on. Abigail sat beside the bed until the little hand relaxed. When she stepped back into the hall, Nathaniel was waiting. "She trusts you," he said quietly. Abigail looked down at the sleeping child. "I think I trust her too." The next days passed under a strain none of them could ignore. Nathaniel fixed more than fences now. He checked locks, cleared lines of sight from the porch, moved tools where they could be reached quickly. He said little while he did it, but Abigail noticed everything. At the same time, life kept making itself known in small, stubborn ways. Evangeline learned to gather eggs without dropping them. She wore one of Abigail's old scarves and marched importantly beside her to the hen house every morning. She discovered the barn kittens had opened their eyes and announced it as if heaven itself had touched down in the hayloft. She learned to knead bread dough with both fists and ended up dusted in flour from nose to boots. One afternoon Abigail found Nathaniel standing in the kitchen doorway, watching Evangeline laugh while trying to keep the kitten out of the biscuit bowl. "She sounds different," he said softly. "She sounds like a child." He nodded. "I haven't heard that much since before." He did not have to finish. Abigail knew the rest. That evening the first snow threatened. Not a real storm yet, just thin white flakes drifting across the yard before melting into the dirt. Winter announcing itself from a distance. Abigail sat at the table with Samuel's ledger open before her, counting feed and figures by lamplight. The numbers did not improve because she stared harder at them. Nathaniel entered, carrying 2 split logs and setting them by the hearth. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad enough." She rubbed her forehead. "If Hartwell keeps pushing cattle offline and costing me stock, and if winter comes early, I'll be cutting close by February." He came to stand behind her shoulder. "How much hay do you have?" She told him, then the oats, then the number of horses, then the weak sections of fence still left to fix. Without meaning to, she told him everything, because once he started asking practical questions, the burden began to feel less like a mountain pressing down on her chest and more like a problem with pieces that might be solved. When she finished, he rested one hand on the back of her chair. "We can hold it," he said. "We." He looked down at her. "You hired a rancher, remember?" Something in her chest moved at that single word. "We." Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Nathaniel was at the door in an instant. Abigail rose so fast her chair scraped back. Evangeline looked up from the rag doll dress she had been trying to sew. But the rider who arrived was only Tom Patterson from the neighboring spread, his beard full of wind and cold. "Sorry to come this late," Tom called from the yard. "But there's talk in town. Hartwell's buying winter supplies heavy, more than his own ranch needs. Word is he aims to squeeze the smaller places hard before snow." Abigail stepped onto the porch beside Nathaniel. He already started. Tom's eyes moved between them and landed briefly on the rifle near the door. He was no fool. "Then you need to know this too. Folks are uneasy. Hartwell's been pressing on more than one side. If he means to make a move, he'll do it before the deep snows. Easier to break people now than later." Nathaniel asked, "Who else is he leaning on?" "Millers, the Doyles, maybe the Hensons. He's offering poor prices to buy them out before winter, scaring off buyers for their cattle, little things." Tom's gaze hardened. ain't just your place." Abigail folded her arms against the cold. "Then maybe it's time folks stopped facing him one at a time." Tom looked at her with new attention. Samuel used to say the same. He was right. Tom nodded slowly. "Maybe so, I'll keep my ears open." When he had gone, the yard felt even quieter than before. Nathaniel closed the door and set the bar in place. "That changes things." Abigail turned back to the fire. "No, it confirms them." He studied her face. "You're angry." "I'm tired," she said. Then, because she was done pretending, "And yes, I'm angry. Samuel is dead. I'm doing everything I can just to keep breath in this place, and Hartwell still wants more. I am tired of men deciding a widow should be easy to crush." Nathaniel stepped closer. "Then don't be easy." She let out a short laugh that held no humor. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it is possible." Evangeline looked up from her sewing again. "What's possible?" Abigail crossed the room and took the fabric gently from the child's hands. "Finishing supper and getting you into bed before you start sewing your own fingers together." Evangeline smiled. "I only poked myself twice." "An expert already." That night after the child was asleep, Abigail banked the fire while Nathaniel checked the door one last time. He looked larger in the low firelight, not just from height or build, from purpose. A man who had found something worth standing in front of. "You should sleep," she said. "So should you." "I slept alone through worse than this." His face changed at that. "That's exactly why I'm sitting up." Abigail should have argued. Instead, she fetched a blanket and draped it over the back of his chair. He looked up at her, surprised. "It gets cold near dawn," she said. His hand rose and caught the edge of the blanket before she could pull away. "Abigail." The way he said her name made the room feel too small. "Yes." His fingers loosened. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. They both knew it. The storm came the next day, not full winter, but enough to turn the world white by afternoon. Snow blew sideways across the yard. The barn roof groaned under the first weight of it. Cattle pressed together in the lower pasture. The whole ranch seemed to shrink inward beneath the weather. Inside, the cabin grew warmer, closer. Abigail taught Evangeline how to make corn cakes. Nathaniel came in 3 times during the day, red-faced from cold, to report on livestock and fences. By evening, all 3 of them were around the fire while the storm clawed at the walls outside. "Tell the bear story," Evangeline begged, wrapped in a quilt with a kitten in her lap. Abigail smiled despite herself. "Again." "Again." So Abigail told the story of her grandmother chasing a black bear from a pie table with only a rolling pin and bad temper. Evangeline gasped in all the right places. Nathaniel laughed once quietly when Abigail described the bear choosing retreat over pastry-related death. When the story ended, the child yawned hugely. "You're fading," Nathaniel said. "No, I'm not." The words were brave. The drooping eyelids ruined them. Abigail rose. "Come on, sweet pea." Evangeline reached toward her without thinking, and Abigail lifted her from the quilt. The child rested her head against Abigail's shoulder as naturally as breathing. Nathaniel watched them both. At the doorway to the side room, Evangeline opened one sleepy eye. "Mrs. Abigail." "Yes." "When the snow stops, can we make more bread?" Abigail smiled down at her. "Yes." "And can Papa stay forever?" The room went still. Nathaniel did not move. Evangeline was half asleep already, too deep in dreams to understand the question she had dropped into the middle of both their hearts. Abigail tucked her under the quilt and smoothed her hair back. "Sleep now." When she returned to the main room, Nathaniel was standing by the fire, one hand braced on the mantel. "She asks what she wants," he said, almost apologetically. "She's a child." "She means things, though." Abigail looked into the flames. "So do grown people." The silence between them deepened, not empty now, but full of fear, full of longing, full of all the things neither of them had the courage to touch directly yet. Outside, the wind dropped for the first time in hours. Then somewhere in the darkness beyond the barn a horse screamed. Nathaniel was moving before the sound fully registered. He snatched the rifle from beside the door and threw it open. Cold air slammed into the cabin. "What is it?" Abigail asked, already on her feet. He stepped onto the porch and looked toward the barn. Orange light flickered against the snow, and in the next second both of them saw it clearly. Fire. The word hit the night like a gunshot in Abigail's chest. Fire. For one frozen second she could only stare at the orange glow rising through the storm-dark air beyond the barn. Then everything moved at once. Nathaniel was already off the porch and running through the snow, rifle in one hand, the other reaching for the barn door before he was even there. Abigail spun back inside. "Evangeline," she called, sharp and urgent. "Up now, sweet pea, up." The child stumbled from the side room, clutching her doll, confusion and fear all over her face. "What happened?" "The barn's on fire," Abigail said, forcing calm into her voice though her heart was hammering so hard it hurt. "Put on your boots, right now." Outside, horses screamed again. The sound tore through the night so wild and terrified it made Abigail's blood run cold. She shoved Evangeline's boots toward her, grabbed shawls, then ran for the water buckets near the door. By the time she reached the yard, Nathaniel had already thrown open the barn doors. Smoke billowed out thick and black, chased by sparks and flame. One whole side of the barn was burning hot and hard, the fire racing up dry wood as if it had been waiting there all along. "Buckets!" Nathaniel shouted. Abigail dropped one near the pump and began hauling water with numb hands. The cold bit through her skin, but the fire burned hotter than the storm. Steam rose when she flung the first bucket against the lower wall. It did almost nothing. The horses inside kicked and slammed against their stalls in panic. Nathaniel. But he was already in there. He disappeared into the smoke without hesitation, and for one sickening moment Abigail could not breathe at all. Then the first horse burst from the barn, wild-eyed and snorting, nearly slipping in the snow before racing toward the far corral. A second came behind it, then a third. "Nathaniel!" Evangeline cried from the porch. "Stay there!" Abigail shouted. The child stood barefoot in the doorway despite the boots, shawl hanging loose around her shoulders, eyes wide with terror. Abigail wanted to run to her, but the fire roared louder and the west wall of the barn groaned. Nathaniel emerged through the smoke with Evangeline's little mare, Buttercup, half-blinded and shaking under a blanket thrown over her head. He dragged the horse into the yard, coughed hard, then shoved the lead rope toward the child. "Take her to the fence, Sunshine. Hold her tight." Evangeline's fear broke just enough for action. She ran forward, hands closing around the rope with desperate determination. "The kittens," she cried. "The barn kittens are in there." Abigail felt the words like a knife, but there was no time. The fire leaped higher, catching the loft now, the old dry hay feeding it like kindling. Then the cattle started bawling. Nathaniel turned fast. The corral. The nearest fence had already splintered under the pressure of frightened animals. Cattle shoved and surged against one another, eyes rolling white in the firelight. If they stampeded through the yard, they would scatter half the herd into the storm. Together, Abigail and Nathaniel moved toward them, waving arms, shouting, using every ounce of nerve and experience to turn panic away from the house and into the open lower pasture. It was dangerous work. More than once a frightened steer came too close, and more than once Nathaniel caught Abigail by the arm and pulled her clear. By the time the worst of the herd had broken into the snowy dark, the barn was lost. They all knew it. The roof gave way with a shower of sparks and a sound like the sky cracking open. Evangeline screamed and buried her face against Buttercup's neck. Abigail stood frozen, soot on her face, hair half fallen from its pins, and watched as a year's worth of work and shelter collapsed into flame and smoke. Nathaniel came to stand beside her, chest heaving, face blackened with ash. "It was set," he said hoarsely. She turned to him. "What?" He pointed toward the side where the fire had started lowest and fastest. "Too quick, too hot. Somebody said it." Hartwell, the name did not have to be spoken. Evangeline looked from one adult to the other, her face wet with tears. "The kittens," she whispered again. Abigail dropped to her knees in the snow and pulled the child against her. This time she let herself cry too, not loud, not broken. Just hot tears in the freezing dark while the barn burned down before them. By dawn, only black beams and smoking ruin remained. The storm had passed, leaving the ranch silent under a skin of white. Smoke drifted upward in long gray ribbons. The yard looked strange without the barn standing at its center, as if a tooth had been pulled from the face of the land. Nathaniel walked the ground as the first pale light spread over the snow. He found what he had expected to find. Fresh horse tracks beyond the windbreak, a torch stub half buried near the side wall. No accident, no doubt. When he returned, Abigail was already outside, wrapped in a coat, staring at the ruins with a look so empty it frightened him. He held out the torch stub. She looked at it once. Hartwell. Yes. Her lips pressed together. He burned my husband's barn to force me off my land. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He burned our barn. The word slipped out before either of them could stop it. Abigail looked at him then, long and hard. Something flickered through her grief, something fierce and alive beneath the ruin. But before she could answer, riders appeared on the ridge. Nathaniel went for the rifle at once, but the first voice that carried down was familiar. Abigail. Tom Patterson. Behind him rode 6 more neighbors. By the time they reached the yard and saw the blackened wreckage, their faces had changed from concern to anger. Lord above, Tom muttered, dismounting. He actually did it. Another man spat into the snow. Hartwell's gone too far now. Abigail stood straighter. I have no proof that hold in town. Tom looked at the torch in Nathaniel's hand and the tracks in the snow. Maybe not enough for court, enough for me. Within an hour more people came. Men from nearby spreads, women carrying blankets and coffee, 2 boys who offered without being asked to help round up the scattered cattle. A ranch wife from down the creek brought loaves of bread and sat with Evangeline on the porch while the child cried over the lost kittens. By midday the yard was crowded with wagons, horses, and voices. Abigail had never seen anything like it. These folks are here for you, Nathaniel said quietly beside her. She shook her head. They're here because they know if Hartwell can burn me out, he can burn any one of them. Maybe. Nathaniel looked across the yard where men were already measuring the burned foundation. Doesn't make it less real. Tom Patterson climbed onto the broken water trough and shouted for attention. Listen up. Hartwell wants us scared and separate, wants us each thinking we stand alone. I say he's had enough of that. A murmur of agreement rolled through the group. We raise her a new barn, Tom went on, pointing toward the ruins. Bigger and stronger than the last. We post watch on every small place in the valley. We share feed where needed, labor where needed, and if Hartwell wants one of us, he faces all of us. The answer came back louder this time. All of us. Abigail's eyes stung again, but these tears were different. A woman beside her squeezed her hand. That's frontier law, honey. We survive together or we don't survive at all. For 3 straight days, the ranch turned into a living thing made of many hands. Men cut timber and raised beams. Boys fetched nails and tools. Women cooked over open fires, patched coats, soothed frightened children, and kept the whole operation moving like clockwork. Nathaniel worked from dawn until full dark without once slowing. Tom Patterson organized shifts. Even old Henry from the general store arrived with sacks of coffee and flour, and declared loudly that anyone who thought a widow would be burned off her land did not know Montana women. Evangeline moved through it all like a small ghost at first, quiet and watchful. Then, little by little, the life in her returned. She carried cups of coffee in 2 hands to the men framing the new barn. She sat beside Abigail and handed over nails one by one. She asked every night if kittens went to heaven and accepted Abigail's answer that if anything deserved heaven, it was kittens. On the 3rd evening, when the skeleton of the new barn stood against the sky, Abigail found Nathaniel alone by the half-built wall, driving the last nail into a support beam. You haven't stopped once, she said. He looked up, sweat and sawdust across his face despite the cold. Neither have you. She stepped closer. You called it our barn. A small stillness settled between them. Nathaniel rested his hammer against the beam. I did. And did you mean it? His eyes searched hers. Yes. The honesty of it struck her harder than any speech could have. I was afraid, Abigail admitted. After Samuel died, I thought if I let anyone matter again, the land would take them too, or men like Hartwell would. Nathaniel's face softened. I know. She looked toward the house where Evangeline's shadow moved in the window. But somehow, without asking permission, you and that child became part of every corner of this place. He took one step toward her. You became ours too. Abigail closed her eyes for half a breath. When she opened them again, the fear was still there, but something else had grown bigger. Then a horse pounded into the yard hard enough to spray dirt and snow. Marshal Brennan. The lawman swung down fast, face grim. Need a word. The whole yard quieted. What is it? Nathaniel asked. Brennan pulled off his gloves. Pike Morrison's been telling folks he's got a warrant coming for theft. Says Hartwell claims you've been moving branded stock across lines. That's nonsense, Abigail snapped. I know that, you know that. Hartwell don't care, he's laying groundwork. Wants legal cover for whatever comes next. Nathaniel folded his arms. Can you stop him? Brennan looked at the half-built barn, the gathered ranchers, the smoke still lingering over the blackened ruins. Not on rumor, but I'll tell you this plain. Hartwell's growing careless. Men like him do when they think they've already won. Nathaniel's expression changed. Careless men leave evidence. Sometimes, Brennan held his gaze. And sometimes they need someone who knows how to find it. Abigail looked between them. What are you saying? The marshal lowered his voice. I'm saying if Hartwell's crossed into arson, intimidation, land fraud, and attempted murder, he didn't start yesterday. I'm saying a man with Nathaniel's old eyes might see things others miss. And I'm saying if enough proof lands on my desk, even Hartwell's money won't keep federal law off him forever. Brennan left soon after, but his meaning stayed behind. That night, long after the last hammer fell silent and the ranch hands and neighbors rolled into blankets around scattered fires, Abigail sat at the kitchen table with Nathaniel while Evangeline slept in the side room. You're thinking about it, Abigail said. Yes. It's dangerous. Yes. She let out a breath. I'm tired of that word. Nathaniel leaned forward, forearms on his knees. So am I, but danger doesn't disappear because we hate it. What if he comes for Eve? Nathaniel's whole face hardened. Then I end it. There was no drama in the words. That made them more frightening. Abigail reached across the table and laid her hand over his. I don't want revenge. He turned his hand and laced his fingers through hers. Neither do I want it finished. The next days changed the shape of everything. With Tom Patterson and Marshal Brennan quietly helping where they could, Nathaniel began gathering what Hartwell had never expected anyone to gather. Names, dates, threats, burned-out claims. Missing cattle that always ended up on Hartwell land after a family folded and left. Men who had once worked for Hartwell and now drank too much because they knew too much. Ranchers who had kept quiet out of fear until they saw Abigail's new barn rise from the ashes and realized fear was no longer enough reason to stay silent. The most important break came from a wiry ranch hand named Jake Martinez. He came at dusk, nervous and sweating despite the cold, and asked for Nathaniel alone. Abigail stayed anyway. Jake took off his hat and twisted it in both hands. My brother worked for Hartwell, kept books, knew where the money moved and how the land deals were done. He died last spring. Riding accident, that's what they called it. And what do you call it? Nathaniel asked. Jake looked up. Murder. From inside his coat he pulled a thin ledger wrapped in oilcloth. My brother wrote things down when he got scared, he said. Not just cattle counts, payments, bribes, names of men hired to cut fences and scare off settlers. Hartwell thought he destroyed it all after Miguel died. He didn't. Nathaniel took the ledger and opened it carefully. It was enough, maybe not a whole case by itself, but enough to start building a real one. Jake's hands shook. "If Hartwell learns I gave you that, I'm dead." Nathaniel met his eyes. "Then we move fast." But not fast enough. 2 mornings later, Jake Martinez was found dead at the bottom of Widow's Canyon. Riding accident. No one believed it. By then Hartwell knew something was moving against him. The attack came on a moonless night. Nathaniel woke before the first knock. Some instinct left over from his badge days dragged him out of sleep with every nerve alive. Then came the sound of horses in the yard. Too many. He grabbed his rifle, crossed the room in 3 silent strides, and woke Abigail with one hand on her shoulder. "They're here." She was up instantly. "Evangeline. Get her to the root cellar." Outside, a voice rang out across the dark. "Blackwood." "Pike Morrison." Nathaniel moved to the window and saw shadows shifting all around the house. Riders near the fence, 2 by the barn, at least 8 men. "Come out clean," Morrison called. "Got legal business with you." Nathaniel answered through the door. "Then bring it in daylight with a real warrant." Laughter outside. "No more games," Morrison shouted. "You've been poking where you shouldn't. Bring out the ledger and maybe we let the woman and child stay breathing." Abigail looked up sharply. "He knows." Nathaniel nodded once. "Get Eve moving." They almost made it. Almost. The back door burst inward before Abigail reached the hall. 2 men came through the kitchen. Morrison crashed through the front with 3 more. The whole house exploded into shouting and boots and gunmetal. Nathaniel struck the first man with the butt of his rifle hard enough to drop him. Abigail grabbed Evangeline and shoved her behind the stove. One of Morrison's men lunged for the child, but Abigail drove a cast-iron skillet into his face with all the strength in her body. He went down screaming. Then Morrison had Evangeline, one arm across the child's chest, knife at her throat. The room froze. Evangeline did not scream this time. She had gone white and still, doll fallen from her hand to the floor. "Ledger," Morrison said, breathing hard. "Now." Nathaniel's voice came out low and deadly. "Let her go." "Not how this ends." Abigail took one slow step forward. "Pike, if you hurt that child, every rancher in this valley will hunt you to the ends of the territory." Morrison smiled without humor. "Then I best make it worth the ride." He pressed the knife just enough for a thin line of red to appear on Evangeline's skin. Nathaniel's entire body changed. Abigail had seen anger before. This was not anger. This was something colder, focused, final. The sound that broke the moment came from outside. Hoofbeats, many, then a gunshot. Tom Patterson's voice roared from the yard. "Drop your weapons." The front window shattered inward as neighbors stormed the porch. Marshal Brennan was with them, badge flashing, pistol drawn. In the confusion, Nathaniel moved. He crossed the room so fast Morrison barely had time to turn. One hand slammed Morrison's wrist up. The knife flashed away. Evangeline dropped hard and rolled toward Abigail. Nathaniel drove Morrison into the wall with the force of a charging bull. The 2 men crashed through a chair and hit the floor fighting. Morrison went for his gun. Nathaniel got there first. The shot was deafening in the small room. Morrison jerked once and went still. For 2 full seconds no one moved. Then the remaining attackers threw down their weapons under Brennan's aim and the aim of half a dozen furious ranchers behind him. Abigail was on her knees with Evangeline, hands shaking as she touched the child's face, shoulders, throat. "I'm all right," Evangeline sobbed. "I'm all right." Nathaniel dropped beside them, breathing like a man who had come back from somewhere dark and narrow. He gathered both of them into his arms at once. "It's over," he said, though his voice trembled. "It's over." One of Morrison's captured men broke first. He started talking before Brennan even asked. About Hartwell's orders, the barn, the fence cutting. Jake Martinez, the fake warrant. The plan to take the ledger and make the disappearance of 1 widow, 1 child, and 1 drifter look like frontier misfortune. Brennan listened with a face like stone. When the man finally stopped, the marshal said only, "Get him in irons." The dawn that came after felt unreal. Hartwell was arrested by noon. Federal men rode in 2 days later once Brennan put the ledger and the witness statements in their hands. With Morrison dead and his own men speaking to save themselves, Hartwell's whole rotten empire began to split open. Land fraud, bribery, arson, murder. One by one the stories people had swallowed in fear became evidence. And through it all the ranch held. The new barn was finished. The cattle stayed fed. Neighbors still came by, but now not with pity or fear, with respect. A week after Hartwell's arrest, the valley gathered for supper at Abigail's place. Long tables had been set in the yard. Children ran between lantern light and wagon wheels. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought pies. For the first time since Samuel died, the ranch did not feel like a place surviving by will alone. It felt alive. Much later, after the guests had gone and Evangeline had fallen asleep with one hand curled around Abigail's fingers, Nathaniel and Abigail stood alone on the porch. The night was calm. No smoke, no threats, just stars over Montana and the low sounds of cattle in the dark. "We made it," Abigail whispered. He looked at her. "Not just made it, we won." She turned fully toward him. "There's something I need to say before fear finds another excuse to keep me quiet." Nathaniel waited. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice held steady. "Somewhere between the night you knocked on my door and the night you nearly died protecting my child, you stopped being a rancher I hired for winter. You became home." His face changed at that, all the guarded strength in it breaking open. "She became my child too," Abigail said softly. "Not by blood, by love, by every small, ordinary day." Nathaniel touched her cheek with rough, careful fingers. "Abigail." "I loved Samuel," she said. "I always will, but loving him did not kill the part of me that can love again. I know that now." He pulled her gently into his arms, forehead resting against hers. "I loved Martha. I always will." "I know. But what I feel for you is real, not less because it came after grief, stronger because it survived it." She smiled through tears. "Then kiss me, Nathaniel Blackwood." So he did. It was not a desperate kiss, not wild, not stolen. It was the kind that felt like a promise being spoken without words, slow, certain. The kind two people give when they have looked straight at loss and still chosen love. From the doorway behind them came a sleepy little voice. "I knew it." They broke apart just enough to see Evangeline standing there in her nightgown, doll tucked under one arm, smiling like a child who had solved the world's easiest puzzle. Abigail laughed first, then Nathaniel. Evangeline padded onto the porch and slipped between them, taking one of each of their hands. "So," she said seriously, "are we staying together forever now?" Nathaniel looked at Abigail. Abigail looked at the child. Then she knelt and brushed the girl's hair back from her face. "If that's what you want, sweet pea." Evangeline nodded at once. "It is." Nathaniel crouched too, his hand joining Abigail's over the child's small shoulders. "Then yes, sunshine, forever." Spring came early to the valley that year. Wildflowers opened along the stream. Calves dropped healthy in the lower pasture. The court stripped Hartwell of the land he had stolen and paid restitution from what remained of his holdings. Smaller ranchers kept their spreads. Some expanded. Others simply breathed easier for the first time in years. And on a bright morning beneath the cottonwood tree beside the house, Abigail Thornfield married Nathaniel Blackwood. Tom Patterson stood witness. Marshal Brennan attended in his best coat. Half the valley came with pies, preserves, flowers, babies, laughter, and enough joy to make up for all the fear that had come before. Evangeline wore a blue dress Abigail had sewn by hand and carried a basket of wildflowers down the path with such importance one might have thought she was leading a governor. When the preacher asked who gave the bride, Evangeline raised her hand and said, "I do." The whole gathering laughed, and Abigail cried. And Nathaniel looked at both of them as if he had not believed happiness like this could exist for men like him. Years later, people still talked about that winter, about the widow who would not sell, about the rancher who rode in with nothing but a daughter and an honest hand, about the child who brought life back into a dead house. They talked about the barn that burned and the stronger one that rose, about Hartwell's fall, about the valley standing together at last. But the story the Blackwoods told in their own home was simpler. It began with a knock at dusk, a tired man, a cold little girl, a widow who could have closed the door and did not. The ranch prospered in the years that followed. More children came too, not from Abigail's body but to her table and under her roof. Orphans, strays, young ones left alone by fever, flood, or bad luck. The Blackwoods made room for them one by one, until the house that had once echoed with silence was full of boots by the door, voices at supper, and laughter in every season. Evangeline grew tall and strong. She could ride, rope, bake bread, mend shirts, read ledgers, and stare down foolish men with the same green-eyed calm Abigail once carried across a porch. She never forgot Martha, whose picture stayed near her bed. But she never doubted Abigail was her mother too, in every way that mattered. And on quiet nights, when the children were asleep and the ranch settled under moonlight, Nathaniel and Abigail still sat on the porch where it had all begun. Sometimes they spoke of Samuel, sometimes of Martha, not as shadows between them, but as beloved names carried with honor into a life rebuilt. Mostly they spoke of tomorrow's chores, the weather which cow might calve early, whether the boys had been overfeeding the barn cat, and whether Evangeline was old enough yet to be trusted with her own say in breeding stock. Simple things, beautiful things, the kind earned only after surviving hard ones. One night many years after the fire, Abigail leaned against Nathaniel's shoulder and listened to the distant sounds of their ranch breathing in the dark. "Do you ever think about that first knock?" she asked. "Every day." And he kissed the top of her head. "Best thing that ever happened to me." She smiled, "To me too." Inside, one of the younger children laughed in sleep. Upstairs, floorboards creaked under Evangeline's late steps as she checked on the littlest ones before bed. The barn cats hunted in the hay. The cattle shifted in the pasture. The whole land felt settled, rooted, theirs. Once, the ranch had been a place of grief and endurance. Now it was a place of second chances, of family chosen and fought for, of love that arrived tired and dusty at sundown, carrying a child by the hand and asking only for honest work. And because one lonely widow had said yes, 3 broken hearts had found a home. All things in their time, and at last their time had come.